Section 3, Basic Principles of Digital Photography. Digital photography is based on several main concepts. By understanding these well, you'll be able to understand nearly every other photographic concept. Number 1, exposure is the amount of overall lightness or darkness of a photographic image. If the camera has too little light, the exposure will be dark, and it will be hard for you to see the details in the image. If the camera has too much light, the image will be blown out, too white to see details. Exposure is controlled primarily by two things. A, the lens aperture or opening. B, the duration of the shutter opening or shutter speed. Aperture or opening, which is measured in f-stops. The smaller the number, the more open the lens and the more light will reach the sensor to make the exposure light. B, the duration of the shutter opening or shutter speed, measured in fractions of a second. The longer the shutter speed, the more light will reach the sensor, and hence the lighter the image. One way to better understand the relationship of aperture and shutter speed on exposure is with an analogy. Consider the proper amount of light or exposure to be like a full bucket of water. Then consider a water tap from which you will fill the bucket to be the aperture or opening on your lens. Finally, consider your camera's shutter speed to be like the amount of time you will leave the water tap turned on. The more the tap is opened, the more water will come through the hose into the bucket, and hence the shorter amount of time you will need the tap to be open. Conversely, if the tap will only open a small amount and water is only trickling into the bucket, you'll need to leave the water turned on for a much longer period of time. An interesting and important note is that shutter speed not only affects exposure, but it also affects clarity during action. A fast shutter speed will freeze a moving subject in your picture, whereas a slow shutter speed will appear to blur a moving object. Fast shutter speeds are therefore useful for taking pictures of sporting events. Slow shutter speeds are useful for taking pictures of waterfalls or car lights at night, giving a very interesting image. Just as important to understand are the secondary effects of aperture. A small aperture not only lets less light reach the image sensor, tending to make a darker exposure, but it also makes the entire scene from near to far appear more sharp or in focus. This optical phenomenon is called a long depth of field. This is useful when photographing a subject in front of a national monument where you want both in focus. A large aperture has the opposite effect. Only the subject of focus will be in focus. This is used extensively in portrait photography as it helps to literally focus attention on the subject.